Hi, Sam. Welcome back. Back to reading our book, Charlie to the Rescue. And last time we sat down, we read chapter 1, which was introducing our hero. So we met our hero, Charlie Brooke, who even at an early age put out a fire in his pajamas by sitting himself in the laundry bath. And then he went on with his friend Shank Leather, who we met, to save a kitten who fell into the raging river filled with eddies. Let's see, tonight we'll do chapter 2. Let's see where that will take us. So Charlie to the Rescue, chapter 2, the Shipwreck. We have no intention of carrying our reader on step by step through all the adventures and deeds of Charlie Brooke. It is necessary to hasten over his boyhood, leaving untold the many battles fought, risks run, and dangers encountered. He did not cut much of a figure at the village school. Means he didn't do so well. But okay, probably. Though he did his best. See? And was fairly successful. But in the playground, he reigned successful and supreme at football, cricket, gymnastics, and ultimately at swimming. No one could come near him. This was partly owing to his great physical strength. For as time passed by, he shot upwards. He grew so tall, and outwards, muscular, in a way that surprised his companions and amazed his mother, who was a distinctly small and tiny little woman, a neat, graceful little woman with, like her stalwart son, a modest opinion of herself. As a matter of course, Charlie's schoolfellows almost worshipped him, and he was always so willing to help and lead them in all cases of danger or emergency that "Charlie to the rescue!" became quite a familiar cry on the playground. Indeed, it would have been equally appropriate in the school, for the lad never seemed to be so thoroughly happy as when he was assisting some other boy less capable than himself to master his lessons. It's a very admirable trait. About the time that Charlie left school, while yet a stripling, meaning pretty young, he had the shoulders of Samson, the chest of Hercules, and the limbs of Apollo. He was some catch. He was tall also, over 6 foot, like me. But his unusual breadth deceived people as to this till they stood close to him, meaning he probably looked shorter than he was, but he was 6 foot. Fair hair, close and curly, with bright blue eyes and a permanent look of grave benignity completes our description of him. Rowing, shooting, fishing, boxing, and swimming seemed to come naturally to him, and all of them in a superlative degree. Swimming was, perhaps, his most loved amusement, and in this art he soon far outstripped his friend Leather. Do you remember? He actually swam in chapter 1. Some men are endowed with exceptional capacities in regard to water. We have seen men go into the water warm and come out warmer, even in cold weather. Experience teaches that the reverse is usually true of mankind in northern regions. Yet we once saw a man enter the sea, to all appearances, a white human being. But after remaining in it upwards of an hour and swimming away from shore like a vessel outward bound, he came back at last to land, the color of a boiled lobster. Red as can be. That water had been so cold. Okay. Such exceptional qualities did Charlie Brooke possess. A South Sea Islander might have envied, but could not have excelled him. It was these qualities that decided the career of his career just after he left school. Wonder what it could be. Charlie, said his mother as they sat eating their midday meal alone one day, the mother being, as we have said, a widow, and Charlie an only child. What do you think of doing now that you've left school? For you know my income renders it impossible that I should send you to college. I don't know what to think, Mother. Of course, I intend to do something. If you had only influence with someone in power who could enable a fella to get a footin' at the first round of any sort of ladder, something might be done. For you know, I'm not exactly useless, though I can't boast of brilliant talents. But your talents are brilliant enough, Charlie, said his mother, interrupting. Besides, you've been sent into this world for a purpose, and you may be sure that you will discover what that purpose is and receive help to carry it out if you only ask God to guide you. Not otherwise, she added after a pause. Do you really believe, Mother, that everyone who is born into the world is sent for a purpose and with a specific work to do? I do indeed, Charlie. What? All the cripples, invalids, imbeciles, even the very infants who are born to wail out their sad lives in a few weeks or even days? I mean, come on. But, yes, all of them, without exception. To suppose the opposite and imagine that a wise, loving, and almighty being would create anything for no purpose seems to me the very essence of absurdity, meaning so ridiculous. Our only difficulty is that we do not always see the purpose. All things are ours, but we must ask if we would have them. But I have asked, Mother, said the youth, with an earnest flush on his brow. You know I have. I've done it so often. Yet a way has not been opened up. I believe in your faith, Mother, but I don't quite believe in my own. There surely must be something wrong, a screw loose somewhere. He laid down his knife and fork and looked out the window with a wistful, perplexed expression. How I wish, he continued, that the lines had been laid down for the human race more distinctly, so that we could not err, and we couldn't do any wrong. But we do. We all do. And yet, responded his mother with a peculiar look, such lines are obvious. Obviously laid down, we don't always follow them. For instance, it is written, ask and it shall be given to you, and we stop there, but the sentence does not stop. Seek and you shall find implies care and trouble. Knock and it shall be opened unto you, hints at perseverance, does it not? Don't worry, I'm not going to get too preachy. There's not much in this book. There's something in that, Mother, as Charlie casting another wistful glance out the window. Come, I will go out and seek. I see Shank Leather waiting for me. We agreed to go to the shore together, for we both like to watch the waves roaring in on a breezy day like this one. The youth rose and began to encase his bulky frame in a great pilot cloth coat, each button of which might have been done duty in the afternoon tea saucer. Do you know what a pilot cloth coat is? It's kind of like one that has been coated over in wax, so no water and things can get into it. That's, I'm pretty sure. So a pilot coat, each button of which could have done duty as an afternoon tea saucer, meaning huge buttons. Okay. I wish you could choose any companion to walk with you but leather, said the widow. Oh, that's a surprise. With a sigh. He's far too like his father to do you any good. Mother, would you have me give up an old playmate and schoolfellow because he's not perfect? Asked the youth in grave tones as he tied on his sweater. Excuse me, I'm still getting over the flu. No, not exactly, but not having a good reason ready, the worthy woman only smiled. The stalwart son stooped, kissed her, and was soon outside battling with the storm, for what he styled a breezy day was in reality a wild and stormy one. Long before the period we have now reached, Mrs. Brooke had changed her residence to the seacoast. In a small town of Sealford, her cottage stood at the center of the village, about half a mile from the shore, and close to that of her bosom friend, Mrs. Leather, who had migrated along with her, partly to be near her and partly for the sake of her son Shank, who was anxious to retain the friendship of his friend Brooke. Partly also to get her tipplin' husband away from old comrades and scenes, in the faint hope that she might rescue him from the great curse of his life. Do you remember what that was? Bottle. Okay. When Charlie went out, as he had said, he found that Shank had brought his sister May. This troubled our hero a good deal, for he had purposed having a confidential talk with his old comrade about future plans and prospects to the accompaniment of the roaring sea, and a third party was destructive of such intention. Besides, poor May, although exceedingly unselfish and sweet and good, was at that transition period of life when girlhood is least attractive. It happened for me, about 13. At least unattractive to young men. When bones are obtrusive and angles too conspicuous, and the form generally is too suggestive of flatness and longitude, while shyness marks the manners and inexperience dwarfs the mind. That's one way to put it. We would not, however, suggest for a moment that May was ugly. By no means. But she had indeed reached what may be styled a plain period of life. A period in which some girls, and some boys, become silently sheepish, and others tomboyish. May was among the former, and therefore a drag upon conversation. But, after all, it mattered little, for the rapidly increasing gale, the winds, gale, rendered speech nearly impossible. Just howling about. "It's too wild a day for you, May," said Brooke as he shook hands with her. "I wonder you care to be out." "She doesn't care to be out, but I wanted her to come, and she's a good obliging girl, so she came," said Shank, drawing her arm through his as they pressed forward against the blast in the direction of the shore. Shank Leather had become a sturdy young fellow at that time, but was much shorter than his friend. There was about him, however, an unmistakable look of dissipation, or rather, the beginning of it, which accounted for Mrs. Brooke's objection to him as a companion for her son. We have said that the cottage lay about half a mile from the shore, which could be reached by a winding trail between two banks. These effectually shut out the view of the sea until one was close enough to it, though at certain times the roar of the waves could be heard even in Sealford itself. Such a time was the present, for the gale had lashed the sea into wildest fury, and not only did the three friends hear it, as with bent heads they forced their way against the wind, but they felt the foam of ocean on their face as it was carried inland, sometime in lumps and flakes. At last they came to the end of the lane, and the sea, lashed to its wildest condition, lay before them like a sheet of tortured foam. "Grand, isn't it?" said Brooke, stopping and drawing himself up for a minute as if with a desire to combat the opposing elements. If May Leather could not speak, she could at least If May Leather could not speak, she could at all events gaze, for she had superb brown eyes, and they glittered just then like glowing coals, while a wealth of rippling brown hair was blown from its fastenings and blew straight out toward her. She must have had little clips or combs in her hair that let it all go flying. "Look! Look there!" shouted her brother with a wild expression as he pointed out past the rocky shore where a vessel was dimly seen through the drift. "She's trying to weather the point," explained Brooke, clearing the moisture from his eyes and endeavoring to look steadily. "She'll never weather it. See? The fishermen are following her along coastline," cried young Leather, dropping his sister's arm and bounding away. "Ah, don't leave me behind, Shank," pleaded May. Shank was beyond recall. He was too far out of earshot. But our hero, who had also sprung forward, heard the pleading voice and turned back. Such a gentleman. "Here, hook on to me," he cried quickly, for he was in no humor to delay. The girl grasped his arm at once, and to say truth, she was not much of a hindrance, for although somewhat inelegant, as we have said, she was little as a lizard and fleet as a young colt. A few minutes brought them to the level shore where Brooke left May to shelter herself with some fisher women behind a low wall, while he ran along to the spot where a crowd of fishermen in old salts, enveloped in oilskins, were discussing the situation as they leaned against the shrieking wind. "Will she weather it, Grinder, you think?" he asked an elderly man whose rugged features resembled mahogany, sort of really, really dark, ruddy brown, the result of having bid defiance to wind and weather for nigh half a century. "She may, Mr. Brooke, and she mayn't," answered the matter-of-fact man of the sea in a gruff monotone with which he would have summoned all hands to close reef in a hurricane. "If her tackle holds, she'll do it. If it don't, she won't. We've sent round for the rocket anyway," said the smart young fisherman, who seemed to rejoice in opposing his broad chest to the blast and in listening to the thunder of the waves as they rolled into the exposed bay in great battalions, chasing each other in a wild, tumultuous fury, as if each were bent on being first in the mad assault upon the shore. So the waves were just crashing and crashing down in this storm. Has a lifeboat, Oxswain, been called? Oxswain, maybe. Oxswain been called? Asked Charlie. After a few minutes' silence, for the voice of contending elements was too great to render conversation easy or agreeable. Yes, sir, answered the man nearest to him, but she's been called to a wreck in Mussel Bay. And that brig will be all right, or in Davy Jones's locker, long before lifeboat'll catch round here. Did you understand the Davy Jones's locker? Davy Jones was I think he was like a seaman, and he was buried at sea. So it's either going to bring the brig right and save the ship, or it's going to go down and plunge into the sea with Davy Jones's locker. Silence again fell on the group as they gazed out to sea, pushing eagerly down the beach until they were ankle deep in the foam of each expended wave. For the brig was by that time close on the point of rocks, staggering under more sail than she could carry with safety. She'll do it, explained the smart young fisherman, ready to cheer with enthusiastic hope. Done for she is. Lost, cried one, while something like a groan burst from the others as they saw the brig's topmasts go over the side and one of her sails blown to ribbons. She fell away towards the rocks at once. They refer a lot as ships, like girls. So the ship, she fell towards the rocks at once. Like great black teeth, these rocks seemed to leap in the mists of the foam, as if longing to grasp the ill-fated vessel which had indeed all but weathered the dangerous point. And all might have been well if her gear had only held. But now, as if paralyzed, she drifted into the bay where certain destruction awaited her. Just at that moment, a great cheer arose, for the rocket cart drawn by the men of the Coast Guard was seen rattling over the downs and toward them. Way to go, Coast Guard! Anxiety for the fate of the doomed brig was now changed into eager hope, for the rescue of her crew might lose the ship, but will still save the men. The fishermen crowded around the Coast Guard men as they ran the cart close down to the water's edge, and some of them, especially the smart young fellow already mentioned, made eager offer of their services. Charlie Brooke stood aloof, looking on with profound interest, for it was the first time he had ever seen the Mamby rocket apparatus brought into action. He made no hasty offer to assist, for he was the cool youth, even while burning with impatient enthusiasm, and saw at a glance that the men of the Coast Guard were well able to manage their own affairs and required no aid from him. As the brig was coming straight in, they could easily calculate where she would strike, so that the rocket men could set up their triangle and arrange their tackle without delay. This was fortunate, for the wreck was carried shoreward with great rapidity. She struck at last when within a short distance of the beach, and the faces of those on board could be distinctly seen, and their cries heard as both masts snapped off and were swept over the side, where they were torn to shreds like wild creatures, or charged the hulk like battering rams. Instantly the billows that had borne the vessel on the crest burst upon her sides, and burst high in the air over her, falling back on her deck and sweeping off everything that was movable. It could be seen that only 3 or 4 men were on deck, and those kept well under the lee of the bulwarks near the stern, where they were strongest. No passengers, I think, said the fisherman. No women, anyhow. Not likely. They'd be lowered below on deck, even if there was, growled Grinder in his monotone. Now then, out of the way, cried the leader of the Coast Guard men as he laid a rocket in its place. Line clear, Fred? All clear! Next moment there was a burst of flame, a crash, and a vicious whiz as the powerful projectile leaped from its stand and sped out to sea in grand defiance of the opposing gale with its light line behind it. A cheer marked its flight, but a groan told of its descent into the boiling sea, considerably to the left of the wreck. Oh, what a pity, cried Shank Leather, who had come close to his friend when the rocket cart arrived. No matter, said Brooke, whose compressed lips and flashing eyes told of deep but suppressed feelings. There are more rockets. He was right. While he was speaking, another rocket was placed and fired. It was well directed, but fell short. Another and yet another rose and fell, but failed to reach its mark. And the remainder of the rockets refused to go off from some unknown cause, either because they had been too long in stock, perhaps, or had become damp. Meantime, the brig was tossed further and further in until she stuck quite fast. Then it became evident that she must soon break up and her crew perish. You can't survive that kind of wreck. Hasty plans and eager advice were proposed and given. Then the smart young fisherman suddenly sprang forward and threw off his oilcoat and rain hat. Here, hold on, he cried, catching up the end of the rocket line and fastening it around his waist while he kicked off his heavy boots. You can't do it, Bill, cried some. Too far to swim, cried others. The sea'll knock the life out of you, said Grinder, after you're clear of the sand. Despite these warnings, the brave young fellow dashed into the foam and plunged straight into the first mighty breaker wave that towered over his head. But he was too excited to act effectively. He failed to time his plunge well. You know all about that because you're good at diving. The wave fell upon him with a roar and crushed him down. In a few seconds, he was dragged ashore, almost insensible. I won't say it. Example, whether good or bad or infectious, another strapping young fellow, stirred to emulation, ran forward and seizing the rope, tied it around his own waist. While they helped poor Bill up the beach and seated him on a sandbank. The second youth was more powerful than the first and cooler, meaning smarter. He made a better attempt, but only